Zohran Mamdani is perhaps the most well known and polarizing figure in Democratic politics today. His run for mayor of New York has captured national attention with his self proclaimed democratic socialist policies like universal childcare, free buses, rent freezes, and city owned grocery stores. Warning, we did have a few technical difficulties, but we managed to power through. So even when he freezes, you can still hear his answers. With the election less than a week away, I thought our time could best be used addressing some of the questions people have about your positions, your vision for New York City, and about you in general. So let's get started if we could. This week, as you know, your opponent, Andrew Cuomo, warned voters, quote, if Mamdani wins, you're going to see Trump come in here and take over New York City. And then Donald Trump himself touted plans to, quote, send more than the National Guard, i.e., the military, into cities across the country. So I'm curious, how will you handle, if it happens, if the National Guard or members of the U.S. military are actually deployed to New York City?
I think we first have to be clear that this is completely unacceptable and has nothing to do with the so-called justification of crime. If it had to do with crime, then Donald Trump would be sending the National Guard into the 8 out of 10 states that have the highest crime rates, but he's not because those are all run by Republicans. I agree with NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch that we do not need the National Guard here to deliver safety. That's what we have the NYPD for. And if Donald Trump was to look to make good on his threats, what I would do is follow the example we've seen elsewhere in the country, where you utilize every single tool in front of you. The courts, as they did in California, where you had the mayor, the attorney general, the governor come together, file a lawsuit, was illegal of the National Guard, and to actually make clear to New Yorkers what's going on. Because what we've seen thus far is we've had a mayor who has oftentimes sought to avoid the administration because of the fact that his personal freedom has been in part secured by his willingness to further the president's immigration agenda. And I think for Andrew Cuomo to say that my election would mean the entrance of Donald Trump into the city, it obscures the fact that electing Andrew Cuomo would mean that we'd have Donald Trump's puppet right here in City Hall because that's who he has been, and that's what's on the ballot.
Last week, ICE agents raided street vendors in Chinatown. Every day, these agents are targeting immigrants who are arriving for routine hearings at 26 Federal Plaza. In July, ICE agents descended on a baseball field in Riverside Park, questioning about a dozen 11 to 14-year-olds. Now, imagine you're mayor for a second, if you could. What do you do? Who's your first call? What's your plan?
I think first, to be clear, coordination with ICE is akin to capitulating to Donald Trump's agenda. That's what we've seen. This is a reckless entity that cares little for the rule of law and even less for the people that it's supposed to serve. And it has transformed the sites of what used to be regular court appearances for many New Yorkers at 26 Federal Plaza into a place where many go, fearing that it will be the last time that they'll be standing in their own city. And it is critically important that we have a city that makes clear it's proud of its sanctuary city status. It is actually going to stand up for immigrant New Yorkers and reminds everyone of their actual rights in this city. We've heard from Tom Homan that the more educated a population is, the harder it is for ICE to be able to engage in these kinds of activities. And that's what I would do. I would make clear to New Yorkers that when they're sending their child to school, the school will not let an ICE agent into that facility unless they have a signed judicial warrant by a judge. That is something that Eric Adams has refused to say time and again. It's critically important that families know their children are safe when they come to these facilities.
Donald Trump has made no secret of his disdain for you. He's threatened to take federal money away from the city. He's called you a communist. He said you're going to destroy New York. And we wanted to give you a chance to tell Donald Trump what you think of that. So you have the floor, Mr. Mamdani. What would you say to the president?
Well, to the president, I would say time and again that when you ran your campaign to lead this country, you did so with one of your most prominent promises being to take on the cost of living crisis, to deliver cheaper groceries. If that is ever a conversation you want to have with me, I am here and I am ready to have that conversation because I'm committed to transforming the most expensive city in the United States of America into one that's affordable for everyone who calls it home. But if you want to pursue your promise to create the single largest deportation force in American history, or your promise to persecute and punish your political enemies, then you will have to get through me to do that here in New York City. Because for far too long, what we found City Hall to be is an embassy for Washington, D.C. And what it needs to be is a shining light of what it can look like to actually fight for the people who call this city home.
There's so many things you want to do. And as I can see behind you from all these posters, universal childcare, free and fast buses, you want city owned grocery stores and a rent freeze. And to help pay for these things, you've said you want to raise taxes on anyone making over $1 million a year and raise the corporate tax rate to equal that of New Jersey. How concerned are you, though, that people and companies will leave New York City and significantly reduce the tax base, which you want to use to pay for all the things you have behind you?
I often go back to the statistics that look into this question in previous years. And the Fiscal Policy Institute here in New York City did a study that found that the top 1% leave at one-fourth the rate of other income brackets in New York City. And when they do leave, it's often to other high tax states as they're described, as well as for the reason of quality of life. I say all this to say that I'm confident that New Yorkers will choose to not only remain here, but also that others will choose to join us in this city. And I also know that it's my responsibility that for every single dollar that we spend, that it is a dollar that New Yorkers look at as a dollar well invested. Because I know for far too long, when New Yorkers have looked at the New York City budget, they are not convinced in the way in which this money is being spent. And it's my job to show that every single one of these dollars will transform quality of life for every New Yorker, no matter how much money they're making.
I know that income inequality has really been the cornerstone of your campaign, and it's such a serious issue, not only in New York City, but really all across the country. But I'm curious, how do you balance uh, without making tax increases and regulations too onerous for some businesses that are creating jobs and are being actively courted to relocate to cities like Dallas, Miami, and Tampa? How do you balance that with, making sure that income inequality is addressed? Because you don't want to go overboard and send these businesses to other cities, of course, because they're very important drivers of the New York City economy.
They are critical parts of the New York State economy, and they're also critical parts of what it means to be a New Yorker. And what I've heard from many business owners of both smaller and larger businesses is the fact that New York City has been expensive for a long time, but now we are the most expensive city in the United States of America. And it's an affordability crisis also impacts these businesses because it makes it harder for their workers to be able to afford to live in this city. And when city government doesn't step up and deliver universal childcare in partnership with the state, then sometimes that means businesses have to actually pay childcare stipends out to their workers as a means for them to be able to actually afford to live in this city. So I say this to say that delivering on the affordability agenda is one that will also make it easier to hire and recruit the best of the best for businesses across the country that are located here in our city. And also that we're going to pair this with actually streamlining so many of the regulations that small businesses face in the city. We've committed to cutting fines and fees by 50%. We've committed to saying that as someone who proudly believes in regulation, if I can't give you a reason for a regulation today, it means that regulation has no reason to exist. I mean, I spoke to a restaurant owner who told me about the fact that he has to pay $25 a year to the city for the right to sell a frozen dessert. That does not make much sense to me. A barbershop owner who has to fill out 24 forms, go to 7 agencies, attend 12 in-person activities to be able to open that barbershop, that does not make much sense to me either. And as someone who believes in the public sector, we have to ensure that excellence and efficiency is at the heart of that same sector. And that's what I hope to develop here when I'm leading the city.
As you well know, New York City, running New York City is a huge job. 8.5 million people, bigger than 38 states, an economy larger than most countries. I know you've served in the New York Assembly for 3 terms, and you've heard this repeatedly, but I think it's important for me to ask you and for you to respond. Do you have enough experience to do this job?
Yes, I have the experience of leading both my assembly district as well as this campaign and delivering for New Yorkers time and time again while being in public life. One of the things I'm most proud of is having secured nearly $500 million in debt relief for working class taxi drivers across the city, going toe to toe with City Hall when they weren't actually honoring their promise to those who had bought a medallion with the hopes of securing a middle class life. I've also been the first person to win free buses in New York City's history, as well as someone who was able to fight off a proposal to build a frack gas power plant in Queens. These are examples of what's possible when we're actually willing to fight. And I'm also going to be surrounding myself with those who have the experience that spans generations and mayoral administrations, because it's time to actually build a team that is not characterized by those that you already know or those that are quickest to say yes, but instead by those who have shown excellence time and again, a track record of delivering it, because we have an ambitious agenda and it's going to require the best of the best to actually be able to bring it through. And I'm confident of our ability to attract and retain that talent.
You know, it is an ambitious agenda, but many of the things you're proposing will need to be approved by Governor Hochul. Tax increases, fast and free buses. After all, the MTA is the state run agency and would not be under your control. She's endorsed universal childcare, but could easily put the kibosh on some of your other ideas. So, isn't there a chance uh, that you couldn't be able to implement some of the policies you're running on? And what are you able to do yourself unilaterally without, state approval if you win on day one?
And I've heard this also from Governor Cuomo on the debate stage, and I think what we have are two options in front. Those that seek to try and make working people's lives better. And then we have those that seek to give up at the first opportunity. And Governor Cuomo showed what it looked like to give up. It means cutting tax breaks to your wealthiest donors while refusing to actually ensure that you're fully funding the public services that so many working class New Yorkers rely on. And I am confident of our campaign's ability to deliver on the commitments that we've made to New Yorkers. And I'm proud to not only have the endorsement of Governor Hochul, but also Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie, Majority Leader of the State Senate Andrea Stewart-Cousins. These are three of the most important figures in Albany who make the determinations around the budget. And their endorsements were also endorsements of the agenda that we've been running on. And, when I speak to New Yorkers, I also make very clear, no matter how many times Governor Cuomo speaks about the things that he would not or could not do, it is quite clear from the mayor's office itself. We have the power to appoint 9 members of the Rent Guidelines Board. It is that board that determines the rent increase or lack thereof for more than 2 million rent stabilized tenants here in New York City. That's the board Eric Adams has used to raise the rents on those New Yorkers by more than 12%. That's the board that would actually deliver rent freezes, because it's in line with what we found time and time again that New Yorkers actually deserve in this moment.
She was at an event with you, Governor Hochul, and when you talked about raising taxes, she looked a little trepidatious, shall we say, or a little iffy. Are you convinced that you are going to be able to get her to go along with your game plan?
I have appreciated having the governor's endorsement and even what she said the next morning at a press conference, which is that her focus is on helping people who are struggling. And that is one of the many things that unites us, is on delivering for those New Yorkers for whom this is a city that is far too expensive for them to even be able to afford. And I think that, for me, I could continue to believe that the two most straightforward ways of raising the revenue to fund this affordability agenda, start to Trump-proof our city, are by increasing taxes on the top 1% by 2%, by increasing the state's top corporate tax rate to match that of New Jersey. And I've also said time and again, the most important thing, however, is funding this agenda. This is the way I think that makes sense, but we need to just fund it.
Right now, as you know, 1 in 3 Jewish voters in New York are supporting you, but there are others who have expressed concerns about your candidacy. I wanted to read a quote written by a writer. It's Meha Ahmad. She is an editor for the op-ed section of the New York Times. She really wrote about what your candidacy meant to her as a Muslim. But she also talked about Jewish voters in New York. And she wrote, when she asked someone named Haley Soifer, the chief executive of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, about you and your campaign, this woman said Jewish New Yorkers are, Haley Sofer said, Jewish New Yorkers are concerned that the elected head of the city that has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel is going to potentially give a green light to those who want to inflict harm on Jewish Americans. I don't think there's a belief among Jews that he himself would be a perpetuator of violence, but there's a concern that his language is giving a permissive structure to those who may. What would you say to Jewish New Yorkers who worry about that and worry about some of your past statements and positions?
I do not begrudge Jewish New Yorkers for their skepticism in this race because they, like many New Yorkers, have had to deal with more than $30 million in opposition spending that has sought to portray myself more as a caricature than actually as an individual. And I'm proud, as you said, of the support that we have from a number of Jewish New Yorkers. And I'm also looking to be the mayor for every Jewish New Yorker and every person that calls this city home. And in doing so, it's not just about the commitments that I have made to root out anti-Semitism across the city. It's also about understanding the different ways in which we have to act, that we can actually deliver upon that commitment. That means increasing funding by 800% for hate crime prevention programs. It also means ensuring that there's NYPD officers outside of synagogues and temples during the high holy days. I can tell you on Yom Kippur, after the horrific anti-Semitic attack in Manchester, I had a rabbi reach out to me and ask if I could send additional police officers outside of their synagogue. I said, absolutely. And I was also deeply troubled by the potential of, if that rabbi did not know someone who was running to be the next mayor, would they not have been able to get that kind of protection? And my job is to show that I'm looking to not just protect Jewish New Yorkers, but frankly, to celebrate and cherish those New Yorkers at the heart of also what it means to be a New Yorker.
It's interesting the role religion has played in this campaign. And you gave an impassioned speech about the anti Muslim hate that you've been facing, particularly in recent days. It was a very powerful and moving speech. Can you talk about what was going on and the attacks that motivated you to give this speech?
Okay. I have seen the undercurrent of Islamophobia throughout much of this race, and yet at that point it reached a level that I had not seen in many, many years. It was in response to Governor Cuomo going on a radio show, and as the show host said that I would cheer another 9/11, Governor Cuomo laughed and agreed. He then later on, as he was accepting Eric Adams' endorsement, Mayor Adams said that he was doing so to stop New York City from turning into Europe, to stop a movement of violent extremists who were burning churches in Nigeria. And this all while New Yorkers are turning on their TVs and seeing ads bankrolled by Trump supporting billionaires, supporting and putting up images of me with the word on my face, and polls that are being sent out to New Yorkers asking them if they would support a policy of making halal food mandatory. The kind of fear mongering that has become endemic in our politics was one that pushed me to actually name what it is that so many of us have come to expect, and also make clear that no matter how unsurprising this is, it should still shock our conscience, and it should still be something that we say goodbye to as we say goodbye to Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams on November 4th.
What lessons have you learned during the course of this campaign that you think might be helpful to other Democrats running in the midterms or in elections across the country?
I think the key lesson for me is to listen to New Yorkers. So often the impulse for politicians is to lecture. It is to tell voters what it is that they should care about, what they should consider to be an urgent issue in their own lives. And what's actually required of us as leaders is to listen to those that we're looking to serve and then to deliver on those concerns. And when I asked New Yorkers what the number one concern in their life was, they told me it was cost of living. I didn't have to turn to a poll. I didn't have to look to a consultant. I could just look to a person that I was looking to represent. And that's been at the heart of this campaign, trying to build something that is reflective of that which is pushing so many New Yorkers out of this city.
My final question is, there's so much discord and division, hate out there. The country is so polarized and people seem so angry. And I'm just wondering, how can anyone in this current climate provide a unifying voice? And how can you?
I think it's so critically important for those of us who are in politics in this moment to show that it can be more than this division. It can be more than what we see coming out of Washington, D.C. And to me, that comes from an expansive understanding of who you're looking to serve, and a definition of belonging that doesn't seek to narrow itself each and every day in the desperate last moments of an election. My belief about who gets to call themselves a New Yorker is anyone that wants to, anyone that lives in this city, anyone that is looking to actually find a home in these five boroughs. And my job is to represent them all, not just the ones that vote for me, not just the ones that agree with me, but every single person who calls this city home. And I think it comes from understanding that it's in each other that we find so much of what we love about the city. And the same lesson I think could be applied far beyond the five boroughs that we call home.
If you're elected, will you be able to fix the Wi-Fi?
If I was the mayor, this wouldn't have happened.
Zohran
Why
Mamdani,
do you
despite the
think I'm running?
technical despite the technical difficulties. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. I know you're a very busy man. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm sorry about all the difficulties, but next time, hopefully in person.
Hopefully, that would be great.
All right.
Maybe after you're elected, if that happens, I can sit down and have a longer conversation in person.
Well, anything without Wi-Fi, I look forward to. Thanks
Okay.
again.
Thank you. Thank your team too.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Will do.